Hello folk, how you doing? Scotty.
This week we're asking ourselves, how the hell can anyone still be a socialist nowadays? We know so many bad things that happen under socialist governments, so why do some people still want socialism?
It's because of the fact that people don't understand the difference between theory and practice, and that socialists don't even understand the fundamental basics of economics. Socialists think that they can argue with things like the laws of supply and demand. They don't understand authority prices, so they've not got a clue about price floors and price ceilings. They seem to think that they can operate in an economy without profits and losses. That is to say that the way a socialist views prices, they think prices are merely just an obstacle that stands in their way. That's why any time they see a higher price in the market, they're saying, oh, it's greed.
That's what I will answer today. But first, I think I will disclose the purpose of this video, right after you subscribe and donate on Patreon.
You've got to laugh at that one. It's like a socialist asking for money.
My goal with this video here is to honestly engage with questions about why people still believe in socialism. But this video is instead directed at genuinely curious people who actually wonder how you can support the same ideology as Stalin. This video is also intended to be shared with people like that. If you have an uncle or sibling who genuinely wonders about what modern socialists think about gulags, then you can direct them here at the appropriate timestamp.
So it's rather quite funny that she calls it moral socialism, or, the moral socialist. There's no such thing. It's an oxymoron. To be moral is the complete opposite of everything that socialism stands for. Socialism cannot exist without you using the means of force on everybody else. And you can't finance socialism without stealing from the private sector.
Full disclosure, I am a socialist. My goal with this video is to explain what socialists believe, and ultimately, I hope that giving people an understanding will make them socialists.
She's not going to manage because, unless of course you're an irrational minded person, because the bottom line is, it's not about belief. Economics doesn't care about what you believe. It's about facts and reality, and this is exactly what socialists think that they can argue with.
Which I do because I genuinely believe that a socialist world would be better than the current one.
Again, it's really all just a belief, and the reality proves otherwise. In the real world of what socialism is, not the theoretical, attempt to try and redefine socialism, but the actual, meaning of socialism, what socialism is proven to be. You only have to understand fundamental basics of economics to comprehend how socialism would inevitably lead to a catastrophe. The only rational place that you can get money to pay for all her socialism is basically that of the private sector. She wants to basically try and get rid of that. If you're going to run the printing press, you're screwed. And then you've got the economic calculation problem.
I am a utilitarian. This means I consider the good of the many more important than the good of the few.
That belief ends up placing the collective and subordinates the individual's rights and liberty, and therefore you're sacrificing the individual's needs and wants. The second thing is that the goal there, right, the keyword goal, right, you have a goal for something. Again, it doesn't mean anything. You can have a goal to raise the minimum wage, but the consequences follow. And in the real world, if you were to try and get rid of the government, you were to try and get rid of private ownership at the same time, well, just like Karl Marx had argued, you require the dictatorship of the proletariat. In other words, you're not going to avoid totalitarianism in a nutshell.
I see this as the logical extension of democracy, ruled by the majority, not minority. Because of this, I am totally on the side of removing monarchs as absolutist rulers.
You're using one part of the population, a specific group of people, to force their will upon another part of the population, and the individual is out the question. The individual's needs and wants, the individual's rights have basically been stripped away from them, all for the sake of the collective to force their will upon that of the individual. And the whole purpose of why the United States of America had supported that of the constitutional republic, purpose of why they did, is so that they could protect their individual rights. In other words, protecting the minority individual for the tyranny of the majority. Of course, she didn't call that the tyranny of the majority. She just, magically missed out that word tyranny.
Naturally, to start discussing what socialism is all about, we need to define the current system, usually called capitalism.
You're not living under a capitalist system. Capitalism is the separation the economy for government. It's an individualist system. I don't need to go into that. You're living under a mixed economy. Is capitalism and elements of capitalism present today in the mixed economy? Yes. Is it a capitalist system? No. You're living under corporatism. It's basically a protectionist system, the merger between state and corporate power, and no, capitalism is not the same thing or even remotely anything at all to do with corporatism. It's the exact opposite. You can't pull capitalism outside of individualism and correlate it by any stretch of the imagination to collectivism. That's essentially what she's trying to do. You live under a type of system that's got some element of collectivism. That is to say, they've forced society into a collective group and they've forced the collective to pay for the losses of others. How the hell did that become individualist?
Depending on who says it, that word can mean anything. Conservatives and libertarians use it to mean everything good, and socialists use it to mean pretty much everything bad. For the purposes of this video, we will use the textbook definition of capitalism.
She'll miss out all the other dictionary definitions, of course, that correlate capitalism to the free market. She'll ignore the fact that capitalism is antinomous. Now, the word antinomous means the opposite. Capitalism is antinomous to that of the word collectivism. But that's exactly what she wants to do. She wants to, do that for the sake of her own agenda. And her own agenda is basically to try and pass off capitalism as something what you see today so that she can then try and further the agenda of socialism. That's essentially what they try to do. They basically try to brainwash you into believing a load of socialist pish, in other words.
And that is a system of production, aka a way to structure the economy, in which the industry and land are owned by private individuals.
You'd see the words at the end, rather than by the state. If you were to look at Nazi Germany, or if you were to look at any of the sort of fascist economic regimes where the private sector is strongly controlled and directed by the state via strong government regulation, she misses the point out that today's government strongly regulates and controls and directs the private sector to an extent. It's basically in reference today with the free market. You're not living under a free market today. It's basically in reference today with that of a private sector left be to regulate itself. It's not as black and white as saying, oh well, here's private ownership, there's nationalisation, and that's where it ends.
This means you can buy land and live on it. You can form a business and hire people, and you're entitled to the profit the business makes. All that is capitalism.
Right, folks, so basically she's ignoring the fact that the government takes half of your income, if not more than that. It either restricts you for how much you can produce, it restricts you over who you can employ, how many people you can employ, the wages they get paid and stuff like that, or even what height they can work at, through all the government's regulation. What she's doing is she's pretending that you owning a private company in today's economy, whether it's the United States or Britain, for example, and she's trying to pretend as if to say that you are in full ownership of your company.
Competition, on the other hand, is not a feature of capitalism per se, but one of markets.
Right, so basically she's trying to differentiate capitalism from the free market. You can't do that. Capitalism is an individualist system, and individualism does define the free market. Within the competition in a free market, yes, that's what, capitalism really is all about. Again, she doesn't even understand anything at all to do with the laws of supply and demand. And this is what capitalism's really all about. Capitalism's all about the market value. Capitalism's all about what the market determines what your money is, etc.
Socialism, if you boil it down to its definition, is just an economy in which the industry is owned by the community.
And there's the issue, because she's taken one particular definition that suits her own wee agenda and ignores every other dictionary definition that contradicts her. The most common dictionary definition of socialism, the real world of socialism, in other words, this idea that it's in the hands of the community as a whole. It doesn't matter whether you talk about the Paris Commune, the anarchist Catalonia, which was never anarchist, or the Ukraine Free Territory that was really just a military dictatorship. Every attempt at socialism that you've ever seen has always been down the road of exactly what contradicts the entire argument of the workers' ownership. Reality is, it's always in the hands of the government. After all, it's the government that's the one that taxes the private sector, takes the tax money and manages where the money goes, and manages basically the prices, manages basically production. It's never in the hands of the community, and that's the reality, the real world of socialism.
Instead of an individual. So instead of a factory being controlled by one individual and all the profit going to that person, it's owned and controlled by a group of people, which then decides what to do with the profit.
What to do with the profit? Well, they've not got any profit. because if you do away with the private sector, you've got nothing left. That's why Margaret Thatcher basically stated that if, you run out of people's money, you're screwed. She's basically saying the problem with socialism is you'll eventually run out of other people's money. That is to say, the very fact that you basically require leeching off the private sector, the productive sector, to take for them in order to finance you. See, once you get cut the private sector off, that's it, right? All you've got is the money that's left there. And that means if you're going to divide, you're not multiplying, you're not creating wealth, and this isn't wealth, by the way, in terms of money. Money's just really a means of an exchange. All you've got is what's there. And once you divide, you're not multiplying, unless, of course, she's talking about running the printing press, which is just going to lead you to hyperinflation.
Socialism is a bit like Christianity. It looks like one movement, but once you look closer, it's actually extremely fractured and 90% infighting. For most of this video, I will keep things vague and explain the positions of different types of socialists. Because of this, I'm not explaining one specific form of socialism, so different points may appear contradictory. This is because socialism is such a huge movement with many contradictory goals and opinions.
Socialism is a big contradiction today with liberty and democracy. Again, I've done videos and explained all that sort of stuff. You are faced with the economic calculation problem. You don't understand the needs and wants of individuals, and therefore you're never going to have what you want, and you're most certainly never going to have liberty.
At the end of the video, I will explain one reasonable possible form of socialism, just to give you one exact vision. The reason socialism varies so much is that so many things can be interpreted differently.
No, it's because of the fact that socialists don't understand what socialism is. They're constantly trying to jump all over the shop, and they contradict themselves persistently. And in every single attempt of trying to achieve the mental gymnastics, they're trying to create their own versions. So what it really all boils down to is basically collectivism, and branching off of that, you've got feudalism, fascism, Nazism, imperialism, colonialism, communism, all those sorts of things. This idea of, libertarian democratic socialism is contradicted. Really all what it boils down to is collectivism, and I can define what socialism is. Obviously she can't. Socialism is defined down to that of economic central planning. That's something that they try to redefine socialism to try and suit their own agenda. Most importantly, one of the biggest things that defines socialism, this is what it means by its name, socialism, to socialise property, is to collectivise. In other words, it means to centralise. That's essentially what socialism means. Socialism is about centralism. So let's take, for example, agriculture. What you're doing when you're socialising property, you're centralising it, you're socialising it. Essentially, what these socialists try to do is they try to bastardise the entire meaning of socialism, create all sorts that just contradict everything they do with socialism because they don't understand it.
The most common assumptions are that socialism means something like the USSR, or that socialism is what Bernie Sanders talks about. More about Sanders in a minute. It makes sense that if you hear socialism, you look at history, or even just your memory of back then, and see what socialism meant at that point. And that was Soviet socialism, meaning all industry and trade are owned by the state. And if that is how you define socialism, then you are bound to think that socialism means the government taking control over the industry and people.
Again, folks, it's one of these things that she just doesn't want to accept the real world of socialism, right? All those good intentions and what you intend for things to be like is never how it turns out in practice. That's it. What she's basically trying to define socialism around is what's never been the case. It's always been government ownership, right? And it's just like that theory that they've got, that somehow they'll just magically get rid of the state, and somehow you'll live in this utopia where, well, it's not actually a utopia, but you'll somehow get rid of the private ownership of property, and magically everybody will just come together and you'll accept having no individual rights and liberty. It's just, honestly, folk, man, it's just like these folk don't live in the real world, and that is the reason why it's a waste of time even try to reason with them, even trying to get through to them. There's no getting through to them. There's something seriously no working here, right? They've got no common sense. They don't acknowledge the fact that you may intend for it to be that way, theoretically, but how's it going to turn out when you put that into practice? How's it going to turn out when you're faced up against a society that's self-interested? How's it going to turn out when getting rid of the private sector? How then are you going to pay for all the socialism? You see, they don't think about the real world. And because the real world contradicts them, they reject the real world and say, oh, well, that's no socialism.
The socialist mean anymore. Yes, in the 70s, you could say a good majority of socialists thought that a large state is socialism.
Oh, I see. So they were admitting that it was socialism, and then just all of a sudden one day, after all the failures of socialism, they just magically said, so yeah, we'll just, we'll redefine socialism because, what we defined as socialism never worked, so we'll just try it all over again by just relabeling it. It's essentially what they're trying to do. That's basically what she says. It's in her own words. She basically says it herself. They're basically just trying to redefine what socialism is. Let me just put this in a nutshell for you. You know what socialism requires? The abolishment of all private ownership of property. See, if you don't have private ownership of property, you've got no private property rights. And with no private property rights, you've got no personal ownership of possessions, because without private property rights to clearly outline and define what you as an individual own, if you don't have those rights, you've got nothing there to protect you when somebody thieves from you. That's exactly what I mean about these people. They've got no common sense. There's nothing working up there, right? And never mind that. The point being is that since there's no private ownership of property, it's centralised agriculture, which essentially means you're going to lead the entire population into mass starvation, which time and time again throughout recorded history led to periodical famines. And so they don't even learn history, folk. They're so ignorant.
But this has since changed. A lot of modern socialists are anarchists who don't want the central government at all.
I don't care what socialists want. It's not about what socialists want. What socialists want means nothing. I want a higher minimum wage. Yeah, very good. Economics doesn't care about your feelings. What part of that do they not understand? How does it turn out in the real world? It's like saying, I want a higher minimum wage. Yeah, very good. How's that going to face up to the laws of supply and demand? It's all about I want and what I believe, and, it's a case of everything theoretical. Who cares about what you want? Yeah, I want to be rich. That doesn't mean to say I'm going to be rich. I want to be a millionaire. Doesn't mean it's going to fall out the sky and fucking make me a millionaire.
Instead, they want only local communes. I have a video on that as well. The idea that socialism is whenever the government does things is very deeply rooted in many people's heads.
That's because that is what socialism is. It's state direction of the economy. It's a big part of what defines what socialism is. It doesn't matter about your Marxist theory about, we want a moneyless and classless, stateless society. It doesn't matter what you want. It's about what you're going to put into practice that actually matters.
If you look at the Young Turks, they tell you that the police and firefighters are socialist. So you could say that people who aren't socialists themselves are the ones who think socialism is about giving the government more power.
It actually is socialist. You're basically centralising, the fire service, and you're centralising it for the state to centrally plan it. That's political centralisation. So you see all those conservatives out there and all sorts who claim that they're anti-socialist and they're supporting these public services. They can't even see that they're supporting something that doesn't work. They're basically trying to justify socialism. They're trying to justify government running a fire service. Which is basically central planning. What's the point saying socialism doesn't work and then doing that? It's no different to people who say socialism doesn't work, but we need to strike the right balance between capitalism and socialism.
I'm not gonna lie, the Eastern Bloc loses that comparison. Yes, they had workers in charge of the factories and the profit they made was given to the state, which then invested it back in the economy, usually. But they were all practically dictatorships, which didn't let people leave to the West and sometimes used the military and police to crack down on protests. The Prague Spring and Tiananmen Square come to mind. I'm not gonna try to make excuses for these countries. They had good and bad sides, and the Cold War is too complex for this video. So instead, I'll just give you the good news that practically no modern day socialist wants a repeat of the USSR under Stalin.
Her video goes on for about good 30 odd minutes, right? And it goes on for too long. I'm just going to break this down because I pretty much get the gist of what she's trying to argue here. It's not about what you want, it's about what you put into practice. So here's the problem in a nutshell. She wants to get rid of the private sector. Only entity there that can get rid of the private sector is the government. It has to use coercion in order to remove you of your individual rights and your individual liberty, basically centralised to nationalised, right? It's done through a government. In practice, what that simply means is, in terms of economics, the government then has to look for where's it going to get the money for in order to pay for that nationalisation. Because after all, the government's going to have to nationalise one thing after the other, right? And by the way, in practice, when the government nationalises one thing after the other, it's the government that basically becomes the central planner of it. The government becomes the owner of it, right? That's essentially what happens in the real world, and the government soaks it all up. In theory, the government would nationalise everything, it would own everything, right? As if by magic, the government would just magically wither away, right? The government's going to have to try and find money for somewhere. So it's going to have to use the printing press. And where's that going to lead? High inflation, soaring out of control, and government try to, sort a problem. Now, hypothetically speaking, even if the government did magically just wither away, question then is across 65 million people of Great Britain alone, how the hell does she expect to keep all of them on the same page? She's not even got a clue. It's just this made up. It's a case of trying to place theory in nonsense that just doesn't exist over the real world of what happens. It leads down the road of dictatorship. Society is made up of individuals and we're all self-interested. And the economic reality is you'll be faced with severe consequences as a result of trying to go down the road of all that. That's the difference between practice and the theoretical nonsense. So the very reason why through all that heavy nationalisation you would then see a Gestapo or a kind of authoritarian state with that of the police who would crack down on people is because people would riot because of the super high inflation and everything. And because people would riot, you need to try and keep them in place. And how else do you seek to achieve your utopian goals? Even if you were to get rid of the government, how are you going to keep people in place? These people don't live in the real world, and they really don't understand the first thing today with what socialism actually is. You'll never reason with them because they're so set in their ways. They're so cultist of socialism. They're not actually interested in the truth. They're too busy trying to tell you lies that capitalism is the system you're living under the day. So anyway, folks, I don't know if you've got anything you would like to add in yourself and you'd like to, ask her that. You can comment in the comment section below and I'll be sure to get back to you. I'm going to try and get out a lot more videos and that. So thank you for watching, and of course be sure to like the video and share the video or whatever, and I shall talk to you later. Cheers.